History is written in the bold strokes of myths, yet the true pulse of the past resides in human complexities. When looking back at the 19th century, the figure that dominates the horizon is depicted in permanent gravity. We see Königin Victoria as she appeared in her twilight years, a stout, melancholic matriarch dressed in heavy black silk, her expression frozen in an icy stare that famously signaled she was not amused. She became the anchor for an era of staggering transformation, lending her name to a 63-year epoch defined by industrial expansion, rigid societal prudery, and a vast global empire. Yet, this formidable archetype was entirely a creation of her later life, a protective armor forged to shield a woman of intense passion, volatile emotions, and an unyielding willpower. To view her only through her legendary grief is to miss the extraordinary journey of a young girl who was broken by her family, only to rise up, seize her destiny, and reshape the modern world. Her life began with a desperate dynastic scramble born of tragedy. In 1817, the death of Princess Charlotte, the only legitimate grandchild of King George III, threw the British monarchy into an existential panic. The king's remaining sons, a collection of eccentric, deeply indebted princes, embarked on a frantic race to marry and produce an heir to save the House of Hanover. On May 24, 1819, at Kensington Palace, Victoria was born into this chaotic race. Named Alexandrina Victoria, she was initially a tiny variable in a messy political equation. However, the fragile threads of the family tree snapped in rapid succession. Her father died when she was just 8 months old, followed shortly by George III and his eldest sons, leaving the young princess as the sole heir presumptive to the most powerful throne on earth. This sudden elevation transformed her childhood into a regimented, suffocating ordeal known as the Kensington System. Orchestrated by her domineering mother and her ambitious comptroller, Sir John Conroy, this system was designed to isolate Victoria from the outside world and keep her entirely dependent. Under these rules, the princess lived under a relentless regime of surveillance that resembled a gilded imprisonment. She was never permitted to be alone for a single second. An adult had to accompany her in every room. She could not walk downstairs without holding someone's hand, and she slept in her mother's bedroom until her 18th birthday. This systematic isolation was intended to break Victoria's spirit so that when she eventually inherited the crown, her mother and Conroy could step in as the true rulers of England through a regency. However, they completely miscalculated the psychological fortitude of the young princess. Beneath her quiet, obedient exterior lay a fierce hereditary stubbornness and a burning resentment for her captors. Victoria found solace in her journals and her collection of wooden dolls, creating an imaginary world where she possessed the total control denied to her in reality. The true test of her resolve came in 1835, when she fell violently ill with typhoid fever in Ramsgate. As she lay bedridden and semi-conscious, Conroy and her mother badgered the 16-year-old girl to sign a document appointing Conroy as her private secretary upon her accession. It was a moment of profound psychological terror, yet Victoria's iron will refused to buckle. Day after day, she repeatedly shook her head, refusing to surrender her future freedom and driving an irreparable wedge between herself and her mother. Deliverance arrived in the pre-dawn hours of June 20th, 1837, when King William IV passed away. The 18-year-old Victoria received the news that she was now queen, and her response was immediately decisive. Her first act was to demand 1 hour of absolute solitude, a simple luxury denied to her for 18 years. Her second act was to order her bed moved out of her mother's bedroom permanently. Within hours, the years of control vanished. Conroy was barred from her presence and stripped of any official role, while her mother was relegated to distant quarters. The young queen threw herself into her newfound freedom with joyful energy, hosting grand balls and dancing until dawn at Buckingham Palace. In these early days, she found a trusted father figure and political mentor in her first prime minister, the charismatic Whig leader Lord Melbourne. However, this absolute reliance on Melbourne and her own stubbornness quickly led to the first major crises of her reign. In 1839, Her court became embroiled in the tragic Lady Flora Hastings scandal, where Victoria, driven by lingering hatred for her mother's clique, wrongly accused a lady-in-waiting of an illegitimate pregnancy, only for the woman to die of a terminal liver tumor. The public was outraged by the Queen's perceived cruelty. This blow was compounded shortly after by the bedchamber crisis, when Tory leader Sir Robert Peel requested that Victoria replace some of her Whig ladies-in-waiting to ensure political neutrality. Victoria fiercely refused, viewing the demand as a personal attack on her friendships. Her obstinacy created a constitutional standoff that temporarily prevented the formation of a new government, revealing the volatile way she initially approached her royal authority. To secure her future, her extended family implemented a plan to arrange her marriage. In October 1839, her cousin, Prince Albert von Saxe-Coburg und Gotha, visited the English court. The effect on Victoria was electric. Albert had grown into a strikingly handsome, intellectual young man, and Victoria was utterly captivated. Because she was the reigning monarch, protocol dictated that she had to propose. On October 15th, Victoria summoned Albert to a private room and asked him to marry her. Their wedding on February 10, 1840, ushered in a partnership of extraordinary intensity, marked by both profound romance and ferocious domestic power struggles. Victoria fiercely cherished her independence and initially excluded Albert from state affairs, prompting explosive arguments until a series of dramatic assassination attempts bound the couple together, forcing Victoria to realize she could not rule without him. The dynamic shifted further under the pressures of biological reality. Between 1840 and 1857, Victoria gave birth to 9 children, a relentless cycle of pregnancy that she genuinely detested, describing it as the shadow side of marriage. As she was repeatedly incapacitated by childbirth and postpartum depression, Albert methodically stepped into the vacuum, taking over her paperwork and subtly directing political decisions. Under his meticulous guidance, the court transitioned into a model of efficiency and high-minded morality. Albert became the mastermind behind the Great Exhibition of 1851 in the Crystal Palace, cementing Britain's status as the industrial workshop of the world. To escape London, the couple created their own private paradises at Osborne House and Balmoral Castle, establishing the royal family as the ultimate model of domestic morality for the rising middle class. But this domestic bliss was brutally cut short. In December 1861, Albert died suddenly of illness at the age of 42, shattering Victoria's world completely. His loss plunged her into a deep, decades-long depression. She withdrew almost entirely from public life, lived in near-total isolation at Windsor Castle, and wore nothing but mourning black for the next 40 years, transforming into the tragic Widow of Windsor. This protracted self-exile brought the monarchy to the brink of ruin as a powerful Republican movement took root. Rumors swirled around her isolated lifestyle, particularly concerning her unusually close relationship with her rugged Scottish servant, John Brown. The press lampooned her as Mrs. Brown, but despite rising public criticism, the Queen remained obstinate, prioritizing her personal grief over the political visibility of her realm. Her return to the public stage was forged by her favorite prime minister, the Tory leader Benjamin Disraeli, who managed Victoria through extravagant flattery. In 1876, he engineered the Royal Titles Act, officially crowning her Empress of India. This gave her a grand imperial purpose that transcended her identity as a grieving widow, evolving her into a revered symbol of global stability. Her late-reign prestige arrived with her Golden and Diamond Jubilees in 1887 and 1897, marking 50 and 60 years of her rule. Through the strategic marriages of her 9 children, she became the grandmother of Europe, weaving a biological alliance across the continent, though she tragically passed down the genetic mutation for hemophilia into the royal houses of Europe, a ticking time bomb for future generations. The final years of her reign were weighed down by the exhausting toll of the Boer War and rapidly deteriorating health. On January 22, 1901, the 81-year-old monarch quietly passed away at Osborne House, marking the definitive end of an era. In her final instructions, Victoria forbade a traditional, gloomy black funeral, demanding instead a military burial bathed in white. She was laid to rest in a white dress and her wedding veil, reunited at last with her beloved Albert at Frogmore. Königin Victoria was a woman defined by contradictions, frequently petty and stubborn, yet possessed of monumental resilience. She left behind a world transformed by industrial might and a geopolitical legacy that would violently fracture just 13 years later, when her royal grandchildren would lead their respective nations into the catastrophic slaughter of the First World War.